Okay, so I was gonna type this, but it would have been a book if I would have typed it. So that's why I decided to do a video just for your question. I wouldn't have mind writing a book, but I figured it'd be a little easier to digest if I typed it out. So first thing I wanted to deal with was the idea that the Great Trib lasted past AD 70. We both agreed that it started during that war, but the point of separation is how long did it last? Matthew 24 verse 20. Well, verse 19 it talks about, well, I'll just read it. It says, "And woe unto them that are with child, and to them that give suck in those days." Verse 20. Well, I'll skip verse 20. Verse 21. "For then shall be great trib, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, nor ever shall be." So Christ just told us, or he just told them, that this thing that's about to happen, this great tribulation, is something that you've never seen or that you never ever will see. So whatever it was that they went through in AD 70 was something we ain't never seen. Something that slavery won't even trump, which I agree with you. Slavery is one of the most horrific things that we have immediate knowledge of as it relates to oppression. But Christ said what they went through in that little short war is something that they hadn't seen up until that time, which is about AD 30, and something that will never ever be, ever. So whatever it was something incredible. Well, let's see, could it still be going on? Verse 22. "And except those days should be shortened, there shall be no flesh saved." Well, he just told us that he's going to shorten those days. Then he says, "But for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened." And the elect's sake is significant, so I'm going to touch that in a second. But so he says that the great trib is going to happen, and it's so bad that we've never seen it and never will see anything like it. And it's going to be so bad that unless I shorten those days, some of you guys won't be saved. Nobody will be saved. But for the sake of the elect, I'm going to shorten the days. Well, go to verse 34. "Could it still be going on? Verily, verily, I say unto you, this generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled." All what things? The Great Tribulation and the shortening of the Great Tribulation. But when is it going to happen? "Verily, I say unto you, this generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled." What things? The Great Tribulation and the shortening of the Great Tribulation. When is it going to happen? "Verily, verily, I say unto you, this generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled." What things? The Great Tribulation and the shortness. So the Great Tribulation is going to happen in AD 70, in that generation anyway, and it's going to be shortened in that generation, because he said they won't pass until everything he mentioned is fulfilled. So unless, the only way the Great Trib could still be happening is this. This prophecy was prophesied over 2,000 years ago. Being that he said it would happen in their generation, it would be fulfilled in their generation, the only way the Great Trib could be happening and the shortening hadn't been shortened yet is it would have to be some 2,000-year-old people that hadn't died yet still walking around. And I don't think we would even take that leap. Some people probably would. Some eschatologists that got some wacky, crazy ideas about eschatology, and I've even heard people say that yes, these people are still around. And the only reason they say that is because they understand the force of what the text is saying, and to fit the text into their interpretation, their idea, their presuppositions, they have to make it where these people are still alive. So, but I don't think neither one of us are that are that gone with our eschatology. So I think that's clear. Now let's go, and I'm going to deal with this elect's sake. Now let's go to Luke. Yeah. So Luke is the same thing, in the same, just about the same verse numbers. It says, "But woe unto them that are with child," same thing, that give suck. And he says, "In those days, for there shall be great distress," great tribulation, "in the land." Well, the land is synonymous with the land of Israel, which was a synonym for, again, the land of Israel in those days, not the world or the earth. Then he says, and wrath upon this people. What people? Those people in the first century, Jews. They shall fall by the edge of the sword, go into captivity. And then he says, and Jerusalem shall be trodden under the foot of the Gentiles. Now again, if we go down to verse 34 or 32, it'll say the same thing. That verily, verily, I say unto you, that this generation shall not pass until all things be fulfilled. So we know that whatever he was talking about is going to happen in that generation. That's clear. And unless there's some 2,000-year-old people, well, that's pretty much a done deal, that prophecy and the fulfillment of it. So in verse 24, he says, and Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles be fulfilled. Well, Matthew 24, same thing, but he says it different. But for the elect's sake, in those days shall be shortened. So what is he talking about? Why is he in the same place saying two totally different things? Well, the reason he's doing it is because they both mean the same thing. They mean it in a different way, though. The elect's sake, the elect are Jews. They're Jewish people who are going to go through this tribulation, but some of them will be saved. Okay? Not the nation, but some of them individually will be saved. So he's letting them know that even though I'm about to judge you for what you've done, and I'm going to touch that too, even though some of you have to die, Paul and the apostles knew that they were going to have, or many of the apostles knew that they were going to have to die. They knew that they were going to have to pay for what Israel had done. They were going to have to pay for what their fathers had did. Paul knew it, and he talked about it. I'm going to touch it in a minute. But he's telling Jerusalem, Israel, that even though I'm about to judge y'all and wipe y'all out, some of y'all will still be saved. Okay? Some of you guys will still be saved. Not that you won't necessarily die, because they will eventually die, obviously, but some of you will be saved. Not all of you will die. Well, when you come over here, he's saying the same thing, but he's saying that even though I'm going to judge Israel, Gentiles, what's going to happen as a result of the judgment, your time, the time of the Gentiles, will be fulfilled. Okay? So, and then this too, it says, Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles. That's wrong. They're going to trodden down Jerusalem. Then he says, until the time of the Gentiles be fulfilled. Well, what I think that's talking about is the fact that once Israel is judged or taken out of the way, Gentiles will then be able to be in the same place as Jews were, as well as Jews will be able to be in the same place as Jews were once that happens, because Paul says there is no Jew nor Greek. Okay? The middle wall of partition was torn down, and they are now in the commonwealth, which is a word for administrator. They are in the commonwealth or the administration of the house of God now. Before they had to sit on the outer court. But anyway, so what is that really talking about? Well, look at what Jesus told the apostles, not the apostles, but Israel, the Jews, Pharisees and Sadducees in Matthew 23. After he told them that they were going to be judged, after he told them that they were hypocrites, generation of vipers, you can read it yourself. I'm sure you're probably familiar with that passage. After he called them hypocrites and said the hypocrisy and iniquity and woe unto the scribes and the Pharisees, you build tombs to the prophets, he just tore them up. Then he said, fill up the measure of your fathers. Okay? Ye serpents, ye generation of vipers, how can ye escape the damnation of hell? Now read the rest of that, because you'll see he's telling them that they killed all the prophets, them and their fathers, and they're going to kill the apostles he's going to send as well as himself. And that they have all the blood, watch this, that upon you may come the righteous blood shed upon the earth, from the blood of righteous Abel unto the blood of Zacharias. So that upon you may come. What does that mean? Judgment. Upon you may come is judgment. He says, fill up the measure of your fathers. Now watch what Paul says in the book of Colossians. Colossians chapter 1, verse 24. He says, I'll read verse 23. If ye continue in the faith grounded and settled, and be not moved away from the hope of the gospel, which ye have heard, and which was preached to every creature which is under heaven. Now remember, whenever the gospel was preached to every creature under heaven, the whole world, that's the end. Well, what end is he talking about? Right? Because he just said, be not moved from the hope of the gospel which ye have heard, and which was preached. It already was to every creature which is under heaven. It already was in Paul's time. Wherefore I, Paul, made a minister, he says, now watch this, who now rejoice in my sufferings for you, and fill up that which is behind of the afflictions of Christ in my flesh for his body's sake, which is the church. What is Paul talking about? It sounds like Paul just said, I'm suffering for you because Christ didn't suffer enough. Well, we know Christ suffered enough. So that's not what Paul is saying. What Paul is saying is, my suffering, I'm glad I'm suffering because I was going to have to fill up the measure, or fill up that which is behind of the afflictions of Christ. What are the afflictions of Christ? All right. Then he says, in my flesh, for his body's sake. Well, we know Christ suffered enough. His body's sake, which is the church, is just that. So Paul and the other Jews, the elect, which Paul was a part of, they had to suffer. They had to die. They had to go through this to pay, to fill up the cup, to pay for what they'd done. We know what Paul did. I mean, it's clear. Paul was slaughtering Christians, right? So they had to pay for what they'd done. And the reason is not only because God was taking vengeance on them and judging them, but also he says we had to suffer for his body's sake, which is the church. Now, what that means is the church could not fully be developed until they were fully Jews. Israel was fully judged or fully wiped out. The church then in the new pages of the New Testament was a baby church. It was an infant. I'm going to take a turn real quick, but just kind of follow me because it's all related. The church in the New Testament was an infant. It was a baby church. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, Paul talks about those spiritual gifts they had. And with those spiritual gifts, they were able to use those gifts at will. He says the spirit is subject to the prophet. So whatever spiritual gift they had, speaking in tongues, foreign languages, healing, gift of miracles, knowledge, wisdom, word of knowledge, whatever gifts they were given by God, they could use them at will. And they were using them at will. They were all over the place with it, right? They were doing healings and miracles and speaking in tongues particularly, it just because they had the ability to. And Paul had to tell them and said, no, listen, you guys have these gifts not to show off, and they're not to keep. You won't keep them. That's why he says, when that which is perfect is come, that which is in part shall be done away. The part were the gifts. Paul says, now this is how we know that the church was a baby. Paul says that when that which is perfect is come, that which is in part shall be done away. When I was a child, I spoke as a child. When I became an adult, I put away childish things. So Paul wasn't talking about individually. He was talking about collectively as a body. The church is now a child. But when that which is perfect is come, you won't be a child anymore. He was letting them know that these gifts aren't for your pleasure, really. They're designed to show folk that you are sent by God. Well, why did they need to do that? Because in the world at that time, the only monotheistic religion was Judaism. Then here come these Nazarenes popping on the scene, some of them being Jews as well, saying, no, we're the new monotheistic religion and the only true monotheistic religion. So this was strange to the rest of the world that knew who Jews were. The Jews were the light of the world, God's light in the world. So now here come these Nazarenes, part Jew, part Gentile, and they're saying, no, we're God's people now. So why would anybody believe that after thousands of years of that not being the case? Well, Paul said he gave you these gifts to verify that. That's why he says the gift is for the non-believer, not the believer. The gifts wasn't for them to go around healing folk. It was for them to go around healing folk so they could believe that they were sent by God. And once Israel was judged and wiped out of the way, then the church would be mature. Why? Because as long as Israel was there, the church would never be able to flourish. It would never happen. A lot of people look at the relationship Jews and Christians had in the first century as, okay, y'all Jews, we're Jews, y'all Nazarenes, y'all Christians, y'all do y'all thing, we're gonna do ours. That ain't the case. These Jews was trying to get rid of these Christians. Y'all saw what Paul did. We're familiar with how Paul was. Paul said he was hunting for them. He was searching for them. He was plotting against them. He was trying to get these dudes up out of there. They was trying to get rid of these cats. They were the only monotheistic. Not only were they insulting to Jews because they were saying now we're God's people, but they were the only monotheistic religion in the world until the Nazarenes came. So they was trying to get rid of these cats. So until Israel was gone, the church could never grow. But in the meantime, God gave them gifts to bring people into the fold as a verification that, listen, these Nazarenes, these Christians are now the people of God. Okay? Now, that was a little right turn. I hope that wasn't too heavy. Well, let me add one more thing in there. Look in Ephesians 4, and you'll see some more about the church growth and it growing into its maturity. Okay? And again, once that maturity came, then the church was mature. Or once that maturity came, well, that maturity couldn't come until Israel was wiped out because, again, they was trying to wipe these dudes off the face of the map. Okay, now back to this filling up the cup. I hope this is not too off track, but it's still related. Revelation 17 and 4. Now look at this woman, which is Israel, by the way. Verse 4 says, and the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet color and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, having a golden cup in her hand, full of the abominations and filthiness of her fornication. What abominations? Matthew 23. They had to fill up the cup of their fathers. Now watch this. Verse 6. And let's see what else she was drunk with. And I saw the woman drunken with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. Well, who was that? Remember Matthew 23, he told them that they killed all the righteous, had the blood of the righteous from Abel all the way to Zechariah, and that they were going to kill the remainder of the prophets he's going to send, including himself. So who else was drunk with that other than Israel? Now, if you continue in the book of Revelation, you'll see that after the woman was gone, or right before she was about to fall, you heard the voice of the martyrs yelling out for Christ to come rescue them. They were saying, when are you going to avenge our blood? When are you going to come? When are you going to avenge our blood? This is shortly after the woman, or shortly before the whore was taken out of the way. And then after that, what you'll notice in the book of Revelation from chapter 20 on, you'll notice the wedding ceremony, the wedding feast, and the marriage happened. Well, that's when the church became a full-grown church. So hope that wasn't too much, or too off track anyway. So now back to the remainder of your question. You said if Matthew 24, well, you talked about how you said, but one question I'll ask here. It said if 70 AD was the completion of Matthew 24, when did this happen? Verse 31, and he sent his angels with the great sound of a trumpet, and they shall gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end to the other. All right, now again, the elect were Jews. Now, if you look in the book of Romans, which I'm sure you're familiar with this passage, where Paul talks about the elect and the Gentiles being grafted in, what that is, many people get that confused. What that is, and this is my assessment of it, is the Roman church at one time historically was strictly Gentile. And they had become racist, just like the Jews were in the first century. Jews thought that only Jews would be saved. They were behaving like that. Gentiles thought that only, at this point, because they were now Christians, because again, remember, monotheism was a Jewish thing, not anybody else. Now that these Christians in Rome, Gentiles, who were once idol worshippers, that know and are familiar with Jews and their monotheism, now that these Gentiles have a monotheistic religion based on Judaism, and they have all these gifts of miracles and healings that confirm their identity in Christ. Now they feel like, well, Jews can't be saved. Just like they felt like we couldn't be saved, now Jews can't be saved. Well, Paul had to pull a coattail and say, no, I'm a Jew. I'm saved, right? If God wasn't going to save any Jews, I wouldn't be saved. So he was letting them know, just like in the days of Baal, when Israel rebelled, there were 7,000 elect that God saved for himself. He's letting them know that, no, God doesn't hate Israel. God doesn't hate Israelites, Jews. He has, even though he's going to judge them, Matthew 23, he has some elect that are his. So when he says in that verse in Romans 11 that all Israel will be saved, we know he's not talking about the entire nation of Israel, because he just said in the previous verse that not all Israel are Israel. So when he said all, the all were the elect. All of the elect will be saved. And if you read the rest of that chapter, what he's talking about is the elect being saved is when AD 70 happens, and then those elect, Christ said not all of them will die. Not all of them, because some of them actually escaped. They were being persecuted, but they actually escaped. And, when the signs came, a lot of them escaped. And even after the trip, during the trip, some of them escaped, right? He said all of them wouldn't die. So the elect are those who may not have recognized the signs that he spoke of, and those signs he gave is when the Christians left. Even though some of those Jews, like Paul and some of the other apostles and some of the other Jewish disciples, saw those signs, many of them knew that they had to fill up the measure of their fathers, so they didn't escape. Some of them may not have recognized the signs, so they didn't leave, and some of them ended up getting slaughtered, but some of them ended up not dying, and those are the elect that he gathered from the four winds of the earth. That's how I see that. And or the martyrs that cried out in the book of Revelations after the whore was destroyed. At that time, after the whore was destroyed, you see the marriage ceremony, the wedding happened. Those saints were ushered to heaven, ushered to glory, to sit with Christ in glory. So that's how I see that. Now, I had to actually add a piece here because I almost forgot something that was real critical, and this will take a minute. This symbolism here. And he shall send his angels with the great sound of a trumpet, and they shall gather together his elect from the four winds of the earth. Now watch this. And he shall send his angels with the great sound of a trumpet. We have some historic evidence that this occurred. This is Josephus' AD 75 Jewish Wars. Besides these signs, a few days after the feast, on the 1 and 20th day of the month, Artemisis, JR, or whatever, a certain prodigious and incredible phenomenon appeared. I suppose the account of it would seem to be a fable were it not related to those that saw it, and were not the events that followed it so considerable of a nature to deserve such signals. And this is what he's talking about. He's about to tell us. For before sunsetting, chariots and troops of soldiers in their armor were seen running about among the clouds and surrounding of cities. Moreover, at the feast, which we call Pentecost. Isn't that interesting that this all happened at Pentecost? As the priests were going by night, they were still observing his law. As the priests were going by night into the inner court of the temple, as their custom was to perform their sacred ministrations, they said that in the first place they felt a quaking and heard a great noise. Remember the earthquakes in Matthew 24? And a great noise. Remember the trumpet in Matthew 24? And after that they heard a sound as of a great multitude saying, "Let us remove hence." That was the Spirit of God leaving the temple. So they saw chariots in the sky. They heard great earthquakes. They heard great sounds. And they heard a voice in the temple saying, of a great multitude, "Let us remove hence." And this is Josephus' AD 75. Now that's just one account. Josephus has, man, it was a sign of a sword in the sky. They just sat there in the sky. Many people say it was a comet, but comets move. This thing was just sitting there, and it was sitting there for some days. I mean, it's some crazy. Josephus is off the hook. I'm reading it now, and it's out of control, man. So this stuff happened, man. This stuff already happened, and my assessment on gathering the four winds, like I said, I'm kind of capitulate on that idea. But whatever it is, we nailed the time frame down. So if we nail the time frame down, we can deduce that it happened in 8070 in that space. So anyway, again, that was I know that was a lot. That's why I wrote it. Did a video because it would have been I would have took up all of Rowan's space if I'd have typed this out. So anyway, yeah, that's it. So hope that wasn't too much. Hope I didn't take too many left turns. But if that doesn't make sense, just let me